Hiya, folks. You've no doubt heard about generative AI and how it's changing the world. It's hard to watch a newscast or read social media these days without some mention of it. There's a lot of cool things you can do with it. It can answer questions, it can write stories for you, it can generate video and audio, and there's all sorts of great things it can do for you. And it's a lot of opportunity for you to build it inside of your own applications. And that's what we're going to talk about today is one of the ways you can do that. But let's be honest, it's also very fun. It's a lot of fun to be able to talk to a computer and to be able to type to a computer and to get answers back. And so generative AI is not just about getting things done. You can get things done and have fun doing it. But as I said, generative AI can be used to do a lot of different things. It can answer questions, evaluate sentiment, make suggestions, generate video, images, audio, and it can create summaries of documents, which is the topic of this particular video. Now, under the covers of generative AI are things called large language models, or LLMs. What's great about these is that you don't need very many special skills to use them. They're all accessed through relatively simple APIs, which means any HTTP client that you want to use can access them. Of course, you'll need to get an API key. You'll need to register with them, get an API key, but then you can use any HTTP client you want to use. At the very lowest level, at the command line, you can do this with curl or HTTP-IE. And it works. It's great. It's relatively simple to do this. But you're not going to use curl and HTTP-IE in your production applications, in your Java Spring applications. Or you can use your favorite HTTP client library. If you're a Spring developer, maybe you're using Spring's REST client, or if you're an old school REST template user, that works fine too. If you're a Node developer, maybe you use Axios or you use Fetch. Those are great. Those will work as well. Or just pick whatever HTTP client library you find useful for your language of choice, and it's going to work just fine. The problem, though, is if you're working with generative AI at the REST client or the Axios or any of these generic HTTP client library levels, what you're dealing with is you have to understand, as a developer, you have to understand the URL formats for these various endpoints that are on the APIs. You have to understand the request body format. You have to understand the response body format so that you can write an effective client for these. And they differ between each one. The API for Anthropic is going to be different than OpenAI, and that's going to be different from Google's Gemini, and it's going to be different from something else. Whatever you're using, they're going to probably have different APIs and different API endpoints. So it makes a lot more sense if you could use a library such as LangChain or Llama Index. These are generative AI specific clients that allow you to have access to these APIs without really worrying too much about what the format of the API looks like or worrying what the endpoints are. The thing is, LangChain and Llama Index they're greatly popular. LangChain and Llama Index are available for both Node and more commonly for Python. But you're probably not going to want to use them in your Spring application, in your Java application. So what are you going to do? Well, to be fair and to be totally honest, LangChain, there is a LangChain for J that is for Java. And I've used it. It's not bad at all. I don't mind it at all. But my generative AI library of choice is Spring AI. You probably guessed that. Spring AI offers the opportunity to work with generative AI in Java and with Spring. This means you don't need to learn Python or Node, and you can integrate generative AI into your existing applications, as well as use it for new applications that may need the power of generative AI. So, enough talking. Let's see how to put Spring AI to work to summarize the contents of a document. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. We're going to start off by creating a brand new Spring Boot project. I'm using IntelliJ, but you start your project however you see fit. We're going to call this Summarizer. And I'm going to go ahead and stick with Java as a language. I'm going to build with Gradle, that's fine. I'm fine with all this information, actually. I'm going to go ahead and switch to Java 21, even though it's not really necessary for this example. I just would like to. I'm going to say next. And I'm going to pick two basic dependencies. I'm going to start off with Spring MVC, so that's the Spring Web dependency, but I'm also going to add OpenAI. Now, for this purpose of this summarizer, you might think, well, why didn't you use Google? Because Google's Gemini 1.5 has a huge context size, and you could send an entire book to that with no problem whatsoever. And yeah, you're right. Picking something like Gemini would be great. I'm just not prepared to set up things for that today. So I'm going to go ahead and stick with OpenAI because the document that I'm going to select for summarization is relatively small. It'll fit fine in the context model offered by OpenAI's GPT-4o. Just know that past the point where I actually choose this dependency right here and past the point where I set up the API key, everything else about this, everything about the code will be exactly the same regardless of which underlying model or which underlying AI provider I chose. All right, so here we go. I'm going to go ahead and create that. It's going to give me this new project. Go ahead and close the help. Don't need to see that. I'm going to make my window a little bit bigger so I don't have to scroll around as much. I'm going to go into the code or into the build, and I'm going to add one dependency. There is one dependency that I just don't have available when I created the project via the initializer. I'm going to go in here. I'm going to add an implementation org.springframework.ai Spring AI Tika document reader. So we're going to use the Tika document reader to read our document in and give it to us in text form. That's what we're going to use here. Unfortunately, the Tika document reader is not yet or currently in the initializer as an option, so I went ahead and added that one manually. I'm going to go ahead and click the little Gradle icon here to make sure that all my dependencies are all refreshed, and then we'll be ready to write the code. Oh, I guess before we write the code, I do need to deal with a little bit of bookkeeping. I'm going to go over here to my application.properties file, and I'm going to set up my API key. So spring.ai.openai.API key, and I'm going to set it to whatever your API key is. Now, you're going to have to go get your own API key. I can't tell you my API key because then everybody will start using my API key, and then I have to start paying for it. You'll have to go get your own API key. You can go do that by going to the OpenAI website, or if you're using a different provider like Gemini, go to Google's website, go set that up and get your own API key. But rather than show you my API key here while I type, I'm just going to go reference OpenAI API key. I already have it set as an environment variable on my machine, so I don't have to go actually check it into code that way. When I go check this into source code control, if I were to do that, I never actually reference my private API key. It's only available to me. It's not checked into GitHub. There is one other thing I am using. I believe I'm still using Spring AI 1.0.0 milestone 1 in this build. And at that point, it's the default model you're working with is GPT-3.5 Turbo. I would like to use GPT-4o. So I'm going to say spring.ai.openai.chat. Options model equal GPT-4o. Now I could use GPT-4o mini. Sure enough, GPT-4o mini is a kind of one of the newer GPT-4o models, and it's cheaper and whatnot. I have not tried it with summarization, and so I'm not going to try to use it with summarization while I'm recording this video. I'm going to go ahead and stick with GPT-4o. Had you chosen something like Gemini, you would go pick the appropriate like Gemini 1.5 Pro or something like that here. But you would have also set this as a spring.ai.vertex.gemini stuff. So you wouldn't be setting it as OpenAI. All right, with that said, I've set up my build. Let's take a quick glance at that one more time. This right here is the only thing that's OpenAI about this. If I were to change this to use if I wanted to use a different provider like Google or Anthropic or anything like that, I would change this dependency to the appropriate one. And the only thing about this that is this configuration here that is OpenAI specific are these two properties. Once again, if I were using a different model, even with OpenAI, if I were to use a different model, I would just set a different value here. And if I were using a different provider, a different AI API altogether, I would need to change both of these to align with whatever API keys or whatever other credentials I need to set up for whatever that API is. With that said, from this point on, all the code I write is going to be very generic. It's not going to have anything at all to do with OpenAI. Okay, that's one of the nice things about Spring AI is it holds back the details. It covers up those details for you, so you don't have to think about the underlying API that much. All right, so let's go ahead and write some code. Oh yeah, I guess in resources I'm still going to do this. I'm going to go write a prompt template. It's going to be a really simple file. I'm going to call it, I don't know, how about summarizer.st. Now st is short for string template. Under the covers it's using a thing called string template to get its job done. It is not short for Smalltalk. If you go check this into GitHub, GitHub's going to tell you that your code is like 85% Java and 15% Smalltalk. No, it's not Smalltalk. It is just string template. But hey, if you're trying to get some resume points for having done Smalltalk, if you want to let somebody else believe, a hiring manager believe you're using Smalltalk, then hey, that's on them. But I'm going to go ahead and create this new file called summarizer.st. And here's what I'm going to put in there. I'm going to say summarize. Again, this is like coding in English. I simply tell it what I want it to do. Summarize the content of the given text in the document entry. Summarize, I'm going to be a little bit more specific, summarize each section of the document separately, as well as the entire document. The summary for each section should be no longer than 2 paragraphs. The summary for the entire document should be no longer than 1 paragraph. And then here's that document section we talked about before, and I'm going to put a little placeholder here, and this is where the text of my document that I'm going to summarize comes into play. It's going to get injected here into this little placeholder as the text of my document. This is just a template, and this is what we're going to feed to the LLM to give us our summary. All right, so now there's only a little bit left to do. I'm going to come over here, I'm going to write a controller. So Java class, we're going to call this maybe summary controller. And let's see, it's going to just be a good old-fashioned Spring MVC REST controller, nothing terribly special about that. I am going to inject into it my chat client builder. So I'm going to say public summary controller, chat client dot builder. So Spring AI is going to auto configure a chat client builder for me, and it's up to me to use that builder to build a chat client. So the way I'm going to do it is just really simple. I'm just going to ask the chat client builder to build, and I'm going to assign that to, actually I don't want to do it that way. I'm not going to assign it to a local variable. I'm going to just say this.chatClient equal. I'm going to set that as a field, and then that's where that's going to come from. We're going to use that in our handler method, that chat client in our handler method, to send our request to the OpenAI API. And there's one other thing I'm going to put in here. I'm going to declare a type of resource. It's a Spring resource, and I'm going to call it Summarize Template. And to get that loaded in there, I'm just going to use the @value annotation that Spring gives us, and that value is going to come from class path slash, did I call it summarizer? Yes, I did, summarizer.st. So I'm going to load that in. Okay, now we're ready to write our handler method. This is where all the fun comes together. We're going to handle a post request. Now, we could argue whether post request is the right answer here or not. I know there's people who are really sticklers on whether post should be used for this sort of thing, but I don't care. I'm going to go ahead and just handle a post request today. I'm going to say path equal summarize, and it's going to produce plain text, because ultimately I don't want to dig into it and produce a JSON response or anything. I just want to produce just plain text. Therefore, I'm going to have it return a string. And the summarize method itself is going to take a request parameter called file that is itself a multi-part file. So this is like bonus material here. You get to not only see how to use Spring AI to do summaries, you get to see, if you didn't already know how to do this, how to have Spring MVC take a request with a multi-part file in it. So bonus material. All right, then we're going to take our resource, we're going to create a new resource, and I'm going to get that from How did I do this? From the file get resource. There we go. I'm just basically taking that multi-part file, pulling a resource out of it, and then this is what I'm going to give to the Tika document reader to create it. So I'm going to say new Tika document reader, pass in the resource that I just pulled in, and I'm going to say go ahead and call get on it. And what get's going to do is it's going to return a list of documents. Now, I happen to know from experience that the Tika document reader, when you only give it one resource like this, it generally only gives you one document back, but it's still a list of documents. And so I could just go ahead and say, pull out of there. Oops, I don't know how that happened. Okay, I'm going to go ahead. I could go ahead and pull out of there the 0th document. But hey, just in case for some reason the Tika document reader changes and someday it actually does return multiple documents for one, I'm going to go ahead and kind of merge those together by doing this. I'm going to say documents.stream.map. I'm going to go ahead and ask that document get content, which is the string content for that document. So Tika document reader is going to read in whatever I send it. It's going to extract the text out of it, and then I'm going to be able to get that from the content by calling get content for the document. And they're going to collect all that back into a list saying collectors dot joining sure helps if I could type. And I'm going to just join it with just a couple of blank lines between them. Again, I really don't believe there's going to be more than one, but just in case maybe someday it is, I like to go ahead and just collect them all like this. And then I'm going to assign that to my document text, to a string called document text. And there, just to make this a little bit easier to read, I'll kind of format it a little bit better and to at least the highlights of what we just did. So we're going to get the stream of documents. We're going to map that content into a string, and then we're going to collect all those strings into a single string separated by 2 blank lines. Now, here's where the rubber meets the road, folks. We're going to say return chat client.prompt. So this is how you create a prompt. This is how you start a prompt request with Spring AI using chat client. I'm going to give it a system prompt. So the difference between a system prompt and a user prompt is a system prompt is one that's acting on behalf of the system or the application itself. A user prompt is one that's acting on behalf of the user, and probably 6 of one, half dozen of the other type for the type of problem I'm trying to solve right here. But I just decided to go ahead and go with the system prompt, and with that I'm going to give it a system spec, and that's going to give me something I can work with. But I'm going to go ahead and, before I decide what the system spec does, let's go ahead and finish out the last bits of this so I can get rid of some of those little red squigglies. Say content, and there we go. I just have to go fill in the system spec. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to say system spec. System spec. I tell you what, I'm not going to do it that way. I'm not going to do it with curly braces. I'm going to do it this way. It's a little cleaner. I could do it in the curly braces, but it's just a little cleaner if I did this. System spec dot text, and I'm going to pass in the content from the summary template, the summarize template. So text notice will take either a string or a resource, so that's perfect. And then I'm going to say, okay, knowing that the summarize template has a placeholder in there for the document, I'm going to say, okay, pass in a parameter whose name is document, and that must align with whatever that placeholder is, and give it the document text. And there you go. Don't need a semicolon because of the way I'm calling this. And let's format that a little bit nicer so it's a little nicer to read. And there we go, except for I did that semicolon again. There we go. There we go. That's our code. That's all we need to do this. So I'll tell you what, now let's run it and see it in action. So I'm going to go ahead and click run, let it fire up. We'll wait for it to get started. It should only take a few seconds. And then I'm going to pop up a new terminal window. I'm going to pull that over here. We'll make the font a little bit bigger so it's easier for everybody to read. Great. Then I'm going to go into my book project. So I have the project I'm writing right now. The book I'm writing right now is Spring AI in Action. So when I say go book, it's going to take me into that project. I'm going to go into the PDF directory. This is a directory with with the different chapters I've written. I've compiled them into PDF files, and I'm just going to ask this to summarize chapter 1. So here we go. I'm going to use HTTP-IE to do that because doing this with curl is a little bit more verbose. If you don't know how to use HTTP-IE, you might want to check it out. If you want to know how to do this with curl instead of HTTP-IE, I'm just going to leave that up to you because I'm not going to mess with it. So summarize, and then file. Did I do this right? At chapter 1 PDF. I think I did that right. I think everything about that looks correct. Let's hit enter and see what happens. It's obviously doing something because it's taking a moment. There we go. And we have our summary. It took a little longer than it did when I tested this earlier, but there we go. So let's make this window a little bit bigger. Let's adjust some of the font so we can kind of see more of it at once. And you can see we got a summary. So the entire document is Spring AI in action, introduces Spring AI, blah, 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 blah. And then it covers the different section summaries. So I'll let you read that for yourself. I'm not going to read it for you, but I'll leave it on the screen here while I talk through this. But as you can see, it summarized the chapter for me. Did a good job, I assume. I haven't read the whole thing yet. And of course, if I ran this again, it would generate a different summary. That's kind of the non-deterministic nature of generative AI. But there you go. So let's go recap. All right, let's just recap on what we did. First, we created a simple Spring Boot application that handles a post request, specifically a post request that has a multi-part request body that uploads a document, your choice of document, into the application. Now, for our example, we used chapter 1 from my book, Spring AI in Action, although any PDF or any text document would have worked just fine. It then injects that document's text. It reads the text from that document, injects the text into a prompt template, and then that prompt template asks the LLM to generate a summary for the document. Finally, once it receives that summary, it emits the summary as output in the response. If you'd like to get the code for what we did, good news is I have it on GitHub at github.com/habuma/springAI-examples. There are several Spring AI examples in that repository. Among them is the Summarizer example, which is not exactly the same code I showed here, but it's quite similar to the code. Or if you're using the Spring CLI, you can go add that Spring AI examples project catalog to your Spring CLI project catalog list and by saying Spring project catalog add Spring AI examples and give it that URL. When you type Spring project list, you're going to see, among other things, the Spring Summarizer example listed as one of the projects you can create a project based on. Finally, if you want to create a project based on that, you would say Spring Boot new, give it a project name, and give it the name of the example project that's in the project catalog, followed by a package name to work, a base package name. In this example, it's showing that it's creating the Spring AI RAG example that I created, but just substitute that with the name of the Summarizer example, and it'll create the Summarizer code for you. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you've learned something and are as excited about Spring AI as I am. Once again, here's where you can find me on social media if you want to follow along. And check out my website where you'll find things like my speaking schedule as well as links to even more video content I've created, some of it Spring AI related. And of course, check out my books. Spring AI in Action is now available in Manning's Early Access Program, or MEAP, or if you're watching this from the future, it may already be available in its final printed form. Spring in Action and Build Talking Apps with Alexa are also some books I've written. Great stuff if you're interested in those topics or you need to catch up on working with Spring itself and Spring Boot, or if you enjoy building talking applications like I do. But once again, thank you so much for watching and happy coding!